Welcome back. Chemistry is going to require time and space to set up. In addition to the machine footprints themselves, I also do not have a terribly great automated supply of hydrogen and oxygen right now, and those are going to be limiting factors until I get some centrifuge and electrolysis lines set up. Space, on the other hand, is fairly easy. I just need to get rid of the milk producer. While it was a lovely tool early game to produce Sano essence, I have other better sources of that available to me now, and milk isn't something I really care about at the moment. Centrifuging and electrolysis are both pretty easy and cheap to set up, so I get started with crafting all of the junk that I need for doing that. I can just rip hydrogen out of water in bulk as long as I'm willing to pay the energy costs, and I am, and nitrogen can just be centrifuged out of the air directly. Later on, I will want to do the more advanced air extraction method that uses a vacuum freezer for the noble gases, but for now I don't need anything fancy. All of that is set up to run off of the old ender pearl crushing setup, which, I kid you not, I have literally never used after I created it. Here's hoping that this is a more productive use of my time. As a side effect, both of these processes will also generate a respectable amount of oxygen, so I make sure to capture that as well. I don't really need more oxygen, but I'm not going to throw away useful gases if I don't need to. This process takes way more time than it should, but the end result works, so that's all that I care about. While that system is slowly gassing up the place in the background, I crack open the Thumbnomicon and start doing a little bit of my most favoritist task in the world. In addition to unlocking a few new researches that were added in the forward port, it is also time for me to get started with blood magic and embrace the insanity that it brings. At least for a little bit, because I plan on scrubbing my warp as soon as possible. I also spend a great deal of time learning how to make magical shoes. Sure, why not? That process ends up being a fair bit less warping than I expected. I don't know if maybe they rebalance the warp loads for blood magic or what, but I'm only sitting at 59 passive warp after that, which is totally manageable. Blood magic is, if I had to put it in simple terms, basically Thumbcraft, but everything is powered by the literal or symbolic theft of a fluid that is actually called life essence, but I will henceforth refer to as Goose Juice for the sake of being child-friendly. Goose Juice is sourced from yourself, or random mobs. As mods go, it is really quite morbid, in both uses of the word, because the best way of doing this early game is good old-fashioned murder. The first step to this process is making a basic altar and giving myself the mother of all paper cuts. This will fill the altar full of Goose Juice, which you can restore by any sort of healing item. I chose red hearts because I have a small mountain of them. You can then soak things in Goose Juice to make them gain magical powers, or just turn them into different kinds of random crafting materials. But either way, those then will allow you to progress. This, along with more Goose Juice, lets me craft a weak Goose Juice orb, which is used as a crafting catalyst for a bunch of other things, and also as a tool to let me store Goose Juice in a virtual Goose Juice network that can be accessed by other mechanics that are used by this mod. In my case, it's mostly just going to be used as a crafting catalyst to allow me to upgrade my altar in the future, which I immediately do. This upgrade will let me make ever more advanced things using an ever more excessive amount of Goose Juice in the process. This is a Tier 2 altar, which lets me make the stuff I need to upgrade to a Tier 3 altar, which I then immediately do. This will let me make ever more advanced things using ever more excessive amounts of Goose Juice in the process. This is a Tier 3 altar, which lets me make the stuff I need to upgrade to a Tier 4 altar, which I immediately... No, I'm joking. In order to get the Tier 4 altar built, one of the many, many things I need to make progress in is something called alchemical chemistry. Essentially, It's a brewing stand that runs on Goose Juice. I'm going to be saying that word a lot in this episode. I then take a little detour and upgrade my coils again. My nichrome coils have been done for a hot minute now, I just haven't had time to switch them out yet. Unfortunately, the good times and easy Goose Juice progression arcs soon come to an end. I pretty much only care about 2 rituals that this mod pack has to offer. The Well of Suffering, which will automatically harvest Goose Juice from nearby mobs, and the Mark of the Falling Tower, which will summon stupidly massive blobs of ore from the heavens that I can then mine and use to progress. Both of them require ritual stones in order to build, and I'm not going to be able to double dip. Each ritual will need to be entirely separate and built at the same time. I also need a small amount of ritual stones to upgrade my altar further. These stones require, in addition to physiologically implausible amounts of goose juice and a small mountain of obsidian, a crafting ingredient called terre. Terre needs skystone dust, basaltic mineral sand, and granitic mineral sand. Skystone can be made fairly cheaply in bulk using a crucible recipe, and can be centrifuged into a very small amount of basaltic mineral sand, which can then be thaumcrafted into its granitic variant. The only trouble with this is the scale of the operation. I estimate that in order to make all the reagents I need for the Well of Suffering alone, I'm going to have to craft, pulverize, and centrifuge almost a barrel of skystone before I can do anything interesting. Looks like I'm going to be leaving my computer on overnight again. The amount of maceration involved in this project is so extensive that I go blind, apparently. Nice job, game. That seems like it was working as intended. That I actually break down and finally make myself the multi-block steam macerator. In a normal run, I would have had one of these things going ages ago, but until now my maceration demands just haven't justified it. I have no ores to process, after all, and single block macerators have just kind of kept up with the incidental maceration demand. I already have more centrifuging capacity than I need right now, so once I pulverize what I deem an appropriate amount of skystone, I will just dump it in the centrifuges and let them sort it out. I'm not really in any rush. Ritual stones also will require a substantial amount of infused slate, so I get those going as well. I don't know of any good ways of automating slate production until I have a Well of Suffering, so I suspect that I'm just gonna have to infuse all of them by hand. By this point, I'm beginning to think I have possibly misinterpreted what the name of the ritual was trying to say here. I thought initially that Well of Suffering was the name of the ritual and was in some way related to what it does in the game. I was incorrect. It actually turns out that Well of Suffering just describes the process of making the ritual, and by sheer happenstance also relates to its final function. Each ritual stone will require 13 blank slates and 2 reinforced slates. The Master Ritual Stone will require a regular Ritual Stone and an additional 36 reinforced slates. So the math is obvious. Time to make 591 blank slates. Or, in terms of HP, almost a barrel of red hearts. I told you the things would come in handy. My coven witches pay a visit every so often now. Apparently we formed a special connection, or something, which means they get to invite themselves to my island from wherever they come from. After a solid 3 hours of juicing myself like an orange, I finally managed to put together all of the slates that I need for the ritual. Not the ritual stones, mind you, just the slates. The next step in the process is making all of the granitic mineral sand I need for terre so that my reagents can be alchemized in the background while I do other things with my life. Other things then include crafting all of the fancy juice-soaked rocks into different kinds of fancy juice-soaked rocks, but now magical flavor. And after all that is done, all that is left is to infuse the things. in the pouring rain. As usual. It could be worse. I could have had to walk uphill in the snow, both ways. In order to get the inscription tool I need to complete the Well of Suffering, I will need to reallocate 4 of my ritual stones into making altar upgrade materials, so that I can make tier 4 recipes. That's okay, because I totally accounted for that when I was budgeting my project and made spares. No, I did not. I get those put into place, make my inscription tools, and then spend the requisite 10 minutes infusing enough junk for another 4 ritual stones. Right now, I am bottlenecked on my ability to produce Alianus Essentia. All of my current supply came from ender pearls, which would normally be fine, but those tend to be slow to replenish, and I have run out. To bolster my production, I want to try and make a system that uses the end dimension variant of a peaceful sapling to turn stone into end stone. Or at least that was my hope. The first step in the process is making an end sapling, which I do. I hope you like the rain, by the way, because I'm at that stage of sanity where the rain basically never goes away. Before I start the infusion, I borrow the ethereal bloom that was part of its recipe and plant it on that one weird purple spot in my park. My Thaumic slime farm from way back in the days of manual sulfur production caused a bit of tainted biome to form, and it's ugly and I want it gone. The sapling does exactly what it says on the tin. You plant it, it grows, and the blocks underneath it turn into endstone and occasionally obsidian. It is very much sapling positive, and I make sure to grab a few spares before taking the leaves I want and chopping the tree down. One other fun thing I note is that apparently the planks from the wood of this tree can be used as infusion stabilizers. I will have to remember that, because solid blocks are going to be way easier to spam out than a bunch of mob heads. This is also where I realized that endstone is not a source of Alianus, and the leaves of the tree are. Great going, Goose. That's some solid memory retention right there. This lack of memory ends up being in my favor, though, since it means instead of having to make a bunch of automated stone systems, I can just plant and chop down a buttload of the fancy purple trees. Thaumium is about as cheap as dirt right now, so I make myself a bunch of thaumium shears to save myself the annoyance of microcrafting and fill my bags with foliage. So yeah, I bet you can guess the next step. I am, hilariously, actually running out of obsidian at this point. It isn't that I can't make more, because I absolutely can. It's just that my poor rock breaker is horribly outclassed by the workload that I've assigned to it at this point. Seriously, every ritual stone needs like half a stack of obsidian to make. It's ridiculous. Since I'm waiting on processing for my blood magic project, let's get back into chemistry. Large chemical reactors, henceforth called LCRs, oftentimes have special recipes for chemical reactions that single-block reactors don't. Nitric acid is one of those cases, as instead of going from ammonia to nitrogen oxide, oxide to dioxide, and then dioxide to nitric acid in 4 steps, I can go directly from ammonia to nitric acid in 2. In addition to making the recipe a whole lot simpler, it also means that I need half as many machines, so hooray for upgrades. Like most multi-blocks, LCRs can share walls, so I opt to build them right next to each other and just pipe fluids between them to save even more material. Nitric acid only requires nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen to make, so by piping those gases in from my gas producer using the pipes under the floor, I now have a somewhat slow but fully automated nitric acid production system. If you didn't already recognize the need, this is why I have a cable run, because piping for these suckers is going to get real hairy for a bit, and it will remain so until I have expanded into energistics, so I don't really want to have to deal with that. But why stop there? Sulfuric acid can be produced in a single step using an LCR, so why not just swap out that entire system as well? For that matter, maybe we should swap out the entire biofuel production system entirely. Methanol can also be done in a single step, so for the low cost of 2 LCRs, I can get biodiesel that can produce twice as quickly as the old one, and has none of the jamming problems. If I hadn't run out of tetrafluoroethylene, there is absolutely no reason I couldn't have just spanned these things out until I was producing boosted diesel. These things are fantastic. In all honesty, this whole system has some serious room for improvement, even with all the help from the multi-block LCRs. This will no doubt be subject to another redesign down the road at some point, but for now I'm mostly just having fun with them. The real reason for using LCRs, namely their scalable and overclockable production speed, hasn't really come into play yet, but once I start hitting higher tier multi-blocks, this is going to become almost mandatory for increasing production rate without the corresponding exponential increase in energy consumption. So yeah, this is it for now. I don't quite have the desire or materials to push for boosted diesel yet, but I have sulfuric acid, nitric acid, methanol, and biodiesel cleaned up and stable for now, with a fourth machine open for usage later on. All in all, I'm pretty okay with this. My tools are starting to break more than I would like, so I take the time to smelt up a spot of vanadium steel. In addition to being a nice tool alloy, it makes for excellent, high-durability Tinker's tool parts, which would be more relevant if I ever actually used them for anything. And then I also decide to make another 8 stacks of steel just because. Steel is pretty much free at this point, so I can just top myself off whenever I run low. All of this nonsense has finally given my systems enough time to produce what I need for my ritual. Well of Suffering, how aptly thou art named. The suffering isn't over, though, because I need to install it by hand. Normally, there are tools to build your rituals for you, but I neglected to unlock them because I didn't feel like eating the warp hit for what is essentially just a quality of life change. The inscription tools do, unfortunately, have durability, which is measured somewhere between none at all and absolutely pants. So I'm gonna have to make a bunch of them. Well, what do you know? The Thaumic Restorer actually worked on a modded item for once. Scratch my earlier point. And now we just have to turn it on. Turning it on, in this case, requires 50,000 life points in my network, so this process requires a fair bit of bootstrapping before I can just flick the switch. This particular ritual creates an area of effect where the HP of mobs will be slowly converted into Goose Juice in my altar. While I could just accomplish this mob requirement by piping the contents of my mob farm directly into the ritual area, that seems unwise, so I usually find my best bet is to instead provide a carefully measured quantity of some kind of not especially dangerous mob that is capable of out-regenerating the damage from the ritual. Witches with name tags work the best, in my opinion, but with special mobs and infernal mobs being what they are, I'm not inclined to use those. Instead, I opt to transfer a small sample of the Coven Witch Death Ball that has built up on my Peaceful Tree Island. Good notch above when they say those trees don't stop spawning mobs. They really, really meant it. Coven witches, like regular witches, heal themselves with potions when damaged. Unlike regular witches, they don't create cobwebs, teleport, explode, shoot fireballs, spawn spiders, spawn zombies, spawn skeletons, electrocute the ambient environment, or clip through blocks, and as such are about as close to the perfect mob as you can get in this pack. Balancing how many I need will be a bit of a trick, but for now I just opt to get some, and call it good. Man, it feels good to have that running. With Blood Magic automated with Goose Juice automated and gurgling away in the background, it's time for me once again to turn my attention to bees. There is simply no way around it. I need bees, I need them for too many things to progress in other areas, and I need them now. As far as I can tell, I have no options to reduce their breeding time further, since all the better frames need waxes I can't get, so I just need to put my nose into the grindstone and do it. While working on my bees, I end up needing to get some snowballs for my acclimatizer. Unfortunately, there's all these witches in the way. I apply the obvious solution to having too many witches in your life, which is to start a massive witch war with all of them and let them slaughter each other. Obviously. Also on my to-do list as part of bee breeding is to collect all of my bee-themed loot bags in hopes of getting useful rolls. This results in a substantial amount of advanced bee loot bags, so I go ahead and pause my breeding to upgrade and play the loot bag game. Fortune 1 books are a rare drop from infernal mobs, and I have killed a considerable quantity of infernal mobs. But the barrel storing them only stacks to 64, so that means I only get 16 upgraded loot bags. Hilariously, I actually have more than 16 loot bags, so a couple are just going to sit in a chest unupgraded for a bit. This whole process actually proves to be well worth my time, because I get 2 rolls from these bags that I am very, very interested in. Can you spot them? The first roll is half a stack of Forgotten Combs, which are a special type of comb that I am unable to get because of my lack of native bees. These centrifuge to yield amnesiac wax, which is a crafting ingredient for a couple very useful things. In addition to being needed for something called a hibiscus, which is a flower that converts princesses into pristine, it lets me make magic frames. I also got 3 magic frames directly, which was the second drop. Magic frames are something I'm particularly interested in for one crucial reason. And that reason is that Thumbcraft added a couple new frames that integrate with blood magic, and they need these as a crafting ingredient. These new frames are absolutely cracked. In addition to being cheap and consuming Goose Juice instead of durability, these frames provide me with guaranteed mutations and drop any bee's lifespan to the shortest possible unaccelerated length of time, which is like 27 seconds or something. These 3 frames are single-handedly responsible for speeding up my bee breeding process by an order of magnitude. I have, at this point, been breeding bees for almost 5 hours straight now. When I got these drops, I very nearly cried. To put this in perspective, I'm going to do something a little bit unusual here and take a vacation beyond the fourth wall a bit. Bee breeding has actually been a source of concern for a number of reasons, completely beyond the scope of my in-game progression arc. This mod pack, by its very nature, is very unfriendly to record or stream simply because of the large amount of dead time involved in doing basically anything. And flipping the bird at its intended progression mechanics with a custom rule set like this really does not help the issue. If my in-game statistics are correct, and I checked, so they probably are, for every minute of usable footage that I make, I spend about 40 minutes just playing the game. Add on to this that I am, shockingly, a gainfully employed individual with all of the responsibilities that that entails, and things can start getting a little bit hairy. To help combat that, I try and finish footage collection a couple of weeks in advance when the video goes live. That front load has evened out my production pipeline quite a lot in the past, particularly in the first few episodes where nothing really happens other than me punching mobs. And until recently, that front load was more than enough to ensure I never had to worry about delaying an episode. Well, I say recently, but that actually means until bees happened. So many progression paths are locked behind high-tier bee species, and the breeding process for those species takes so long that bees have single-handedly been entirely responsible for the near-complete elimination of my backlog. Had I not gotten something to speed up their breeding, it is quite possible that I would have had to delay this video simply because I would have had no footage to use. Anyway, enough about that. Let's put these frames to use. I decided to test them out on isolation apiaries rather than crossbreeding ones, because my concern here is that I might crossbreed too effectively and end up soft locking a princess until the acclimatizer can fix it to run in my current biome. Since the soul frames are entirely outclassed by this new frenzy frame, I go ahead and stick them into repair and get to work. And yeah, they're fast. Really fast. Like, by the time I'm done breeding and checking my third apiary, my first apiary is ready for me to look at it again fast. While I was doing this kind of thing before with about 12 apiaries, the real value add here is that these let me isolate pure strains of new species faster, and that, in turn, reduces downtime for new species crossbreeding. And their speed increase also lets me focus on all the bees I actually want, rather than requiring me to spread out breeding into dozens of useless bee branches. My first acquisition is actually a fair bit more mundane as species go. I get peat bees. These ladies produce lignite comb, which can be processed into, you guessed it, lignite. Which is basically useless, except that it's used as a reagent that I will need in bulk later for Goose Juice magic stuff, so anyway, it's just useful to have. Based on absolutely nothing whatsoever, I decide that I'm going to convert 8 princesses into peat and then just make myself a bunch of lignite comb real quick with them. Well, for a certain definition of quick, that is. I'm basically drowning in apiaries at this point because I purchased a ton when I was rolling for simmering combs, what was that, 8 episodes ago? And I apparently just never bothered to stack them? But the frames are microscopically more annoying. After the beework, frames went from being sort of required to absolutely 100% required if you really want to scale your production. So I have to get frame production online and automated. The solution to this is just slam down an old auto-crafting system from my recyclers. This auto-crafter then gets plugged into barrels of frame parts, and I have frames. Easy peasy. Or it would be, if I could automate the insertion of frames. Seriously, I spent a solid hour trawling through every bit of patch notes. I looked through all of the pull requests on the GitHub that I could find that touched on anything even related to bees. I tried looking through my config to see if it was a setting that I was missing. I even tried looking on the Discord to see if there was any chatter about that, because I was just so damn convinced that there was something I used to be able to do with these frames that was nerfed. I was fully prepared to give this wonderful lecture about how dumb it was for a game designed around automation to remove a crucial mechanic, like automatically inserting frames in the name of discouraging early game lag generation, or I don't know. I checked the old version of my Modpack and realized that, in fact, it never worked like that at all, and I had just spent a significant chunk of time gaslighting myself. So, bees cause brain rot. Not a surprise. With that behind me, I slam some frames in manually, slam some bees in gently, and call it a day. I will just have to remember to check on them every once in a while until I get alvearies up and running, because I know for a fact those can be automated. Truthfully, I really could probably have gotten away with not providing frames at all, but the efficiency monster in me cries out in pain at that thought, so I declined the privilege. It is really difficult to overstate how much of a difference these frames made for quality of life and to bee breeding in general. I have gone from doing bee breeding casually on the side to making it a full-time 100% micromanaged project, and I am still struggling to keep up with the rate that these things are being produced. To be quite honest, I am kind of shocked that these princesses don't have friction burns at this point. I'm also only 4 or so species away from titanium, so I should probably get started on that too. Titanium is tricky in general, but I've been playing for so long now that my Garnigia farm has produced enough rutile as a byproduct for me to use for it. And with the power of chemistry on my side, the rutile gets turned into titanium tetrachloride, which is then heated up with magnesium into spicy titanium ingots. These will need to be cooled down, but there is more than enough here to make a block of titanium for breeding and an EV chemical reactor for processing. Welcome to EV, folks. We made it. Since I have accumulated more than enough lignite, I repurpose my first bee blob into titanium comb production. I'm probably going to need some more bee blobs until I get alvearies up and running, but I am short on queens at the moment, so I have to play a little bit conservatively. I am still very much bottlenecked on my ability to produce mineral sand for my rituals, and that is still directly related to my problem with ender pearl production. To put it simply, my mob farm is too slow. It turns out that when you truly apply yourself in Minecraft, your production demands outscale the ability of the world to passively produce things that want to kill you pretty quickly. I do have stopgap solutions, but all of them require manual labor, yuck. And since bees have the answer to everything, I wonder what their answer is to this. It turns out that the answer to this problem is yes. Introducing the phantasmal branch of bees. While less so now, given the prevalence of fan-made guides describing every recipe and effect in the mod, these suckers were one of the best kept and most overpowered secrets of the early kitchen sink mod packs. And this was in an era where everyone and their kid sister was playing Minecraft literally every second of the day. And also, Power Creep was the name of the game in the modding space. So that statement is saying a lot. Next question. This mod was made before the era where people cared about server performance, so I am pretty sure I know the answer already, but I do have to ask, does it stack? The answer? Well, I think you can see for yourself. Enderman isn't all they can do, though. Between the two species in this branch, a quite generous assortment of hostile vanilla mobs can be reanimated with their associated drops at 0 cost. Save that of my electricity bill, but that is not something we're going to worry about right now. Interestingly, this effect also encompasses one other unusual mob that you generally wouldn't expect to fit in that category. Yeah. I am not entirely certain what sort of recreational pharmaceuticals the mod dev was partaking of when they implemented this effect. And I don't actually think I want to know. What I do know is that for a bee species whose preferred flower type is a dragon egg, and who will generally be bred relatively close to someone's base, that this seems like an unusually problematic bee effect. Most bees just do normal things, like poison you, or set you on fire, or electrocute you. Generally, the relative severity of those effects would not lead me to conclude that I should be concerned about my freshly acquired dragon egg hatching. So, now that I have Chekhov's armory well and truly crammed to the gills, some bad news. I am out of time, and as such, stupidly over-engineered mob farms are going to have to wait until the next episode. Thank you for your time. I have taken the liberty of placing a very, very small kick me note at the buttons that YouTube provides people to show their support of a channel. Normally, I wouldn't encourage people to take advantage of this sort of base and miserable comedy, but if you're inclined to accept the invitation that those notes provide, well, I won't tell if you won't. And, as always, I hope you enjoyed.